Hey folks, it's the middle of July and another really hot, scorching day in my Northern California Zone 9B garden. I am always on the lookout for new and creative ways to irrigate my plants, and I discovered clay pot irrigation a couple of years ago. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about what clay pot irrigation is. I'm going to show you a very quick and simple way to build your own clay pot irrigator, and we're going to answer a series of FAQs that I wish I had the answers for when I started doing this. Now, using unglazed terracotta or clay to irrigate systems has been a practice that has been around for at least a couple of thousand years. Ancient civilizations in China, Africa, and even here in the Americas used this method of irrigation. So we know it works. What we want to do is make it work in the home garden. So how does clay pot irrigation work? Well, this material, unglazed clay, is porous in nature, which means that it allows air and water to flow through it, and it relies on a property in the soil called soil moisture tension, which means that if the soil is dry and the clay pot is wet, the water seeps out through the pores in the clay into the soil. And if it's the other way around, if the soil is moist, then there is no need for the water to seep through, and so it stays within the Olla. Now you need to make sure that this is made out of unglazed clay. A lot of pottery does have that shiny glazed surface on it, makes it look pretty, gives it that finished look. It won't work for this because you do rely on the property of unglazed clay to have that porosity. Now, one of the best sources for clay pot irrigation, or Olla irrigation, O-L-L-A, is Tanya Anderson from Lovely Greens. That's the place that I first heard about Ollas and Olla irrigation. So I'll put a link to her very popular video where she talks about how to make Ollas, but I'm going to do it as well over here, so you can stick around and I'll show you really, really simply and easy how you can make this yourself. So without further ado, let's jump into making a couple of different types of clay pot irrigators. And yeah, I am sitting intentionally in front of this beautiful cedarcraft planter because you can see the lovely tiny Tim cherry tomatoes behind me, and everything in this self-watering planter is growing just amazing. I've done a review on this self-watering planter and I will put a link to that at the end of this video. Let's go ahead and make these clay pot irrigators. What you're going to need is a clay pot. You're going to plug the hole at the bottom. For that, you're going to need this thing called plumber's putty. This is a moldable clay-like substance that you make into a little ball and then you press at the bottom, both on the inside and on the outside, and that's how you seal the hole. You don't need a very large piece, just a tiny little piece will suffice. What I do is I go ahead and make it into this little ball, and then I flatten it out, and then I just press it onto the bottom. You want to make sure that the edges make really good contact with the clay pot, because you do not want the water leaking out of it. You also need to fill up the bottom hole. So let's go ahead and do that the same way. Grab just a little piece of this plumber's putty, make it into a little ball, flatten it, and then press it around here. Make sure that they meet on the inside. And that's it. This one is done. Now you can fill up water immediately in this and start using it. I usually leave it for a day or so because I like to actually test if there is any leak. So I put it somewhere dry, and then the next morning I come and I check whether there is any leak. You're going to bury this in the soil, and then you're going to fill it up with water, and you're going to cover it with any kind of plate that will fit the surface. You can actually get the saucers for these. I didn't do that. I'm just going to be using a regular little plastic plate. So the second type of Olla, you're actually going to be joining two of these together, one on top of the other. And so you want to get identical pots. When you purchase these in the store, make sure that you put them one on top of the other, just to make sure that they're properly made and that they sit together really, really tight. You're going to seal these middle edges together. What I use to seal them is super glue. I'm using this Gorilla Glue. This all-purpose bonds virtually everything. So this should do the job. I've seen other people use this successfully as well, so I know this is going to work. And the instructions say that you need to dampen one of the edges, put glue on the other edge, and then clamp them both together. And it should dry in a couple of hours, but again, I'm going to be leaving this overnight, and we'll pick up this project again tomorrow. So let's go ahead and make the second irrigator. Got a damp cloth, so I'm going to moisten the edges just ever so slightly. Need to work fairly quickly with this glue because it does tend to set pretty fast. So make sure that the edges are clean. You need to put a thin layer. Then you're going to join these two together. Wipe this down a little bit here. Now they say you can use something heavy to clamp on top of it while you let it set. Okay, that's looking pretty good. This is the next morning and the color change indicates that we've got a nice strong seal. So I'll go ahead and put some chapters for this video so that you can jump to the questions that you need answers to, and they'll be in the description. But do go ahead and check out the last part of the video at least, even if you do jump ahead, because I'm going to share with you a really cool find that I got on Amazon that I'm absolutely loving, and I think that you will as well. And by the way, if you're enjoying this type of content, do go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and follow me for more videos just like this. I'm going to be showing you how I'm using this clay pot irrigation and how it's working out for me. Okay folks, it's the next day and the Ollas did really well. They dried nicely with no leaks, and this one, my double pot Olla, has dried really well as well, and I've tested them out. There are no leaks, so we're ready to go and get them installed. And while we're getting this set up, I will take that time to answer about a dozen or so beginner questions that I wish I knew the answers to when I got started with my Ollas. Let's go. Now we're going to start with this citrus tree. Now citrus does not need a lot of water, so I'm going to be installing the single pot Olla over here. And that brings me to the first question, which is how often does one need to refill these Ollas? Now this is probably the most difficult question because the answer is it depends. Some of the things that it depends on are environmental factors. Are you having some really hot days? Is it cold? Is it humid? All of these factors affect how much water the plants absorb, and how much they transpire through their leaves also determines how much they need. So on those hotter days, you'll find yourself filling up the Ollas a lot more. It also depends on the type of plant. For example, this citrus plant here does not need a lot of water. I'd say a good deep watering once a week is all that it needs. On the other hand, this fig plant here is a super thirsty plant. It's a very young fig tree and it's drinking a lot of water. It's also fruiting. And so it's taken quite a bit of water, and I found that I need to refill the Ollas once a day. So once a week for citrus, once a day for the fig trees. I'd say on an average, you should consider that you would need to refill your Ollas maybe once every 3 days to once every week. It'll have to be an observed kind of thing. You're going to have to see how much the plants drink, how big your Olla is. All of these factors really play into it. So get your Ollas installed and then learn how they perform over the course of many days, and then start setting a schedule in place as to how often you'd need to refill them. The next question is, how deep should I be burying the Ollas? And the answer to that is actually pretty straightforward. You want to bury it as deep as possible, all the way up to here. And the reason is because the more of it that is exposed, the more water that is going to be seeping out, and you're going to actually lose water to the atmosphere instead of feeding your plants. The other thing also is that over the course of time, the soil around the Olla will tend to settle. So bury it nice and deep all the way to the upper lip and you should be good to go. There, that's looking pretty good. Now as the soil settles, I'll come and I will build up around it again. So now let's go ahead and fill this with water. Another question that I had is, can we add fertilizer to the water that we're pouring into the Olla? And for me, the simple answer to that question is no. You want the water that is going into your Olla to be as pure as possible. Remember that it's those pores in the clay that's letting the water out. That's the only exit for the water. So you want to keep those pores super clean. And that means using the purest form of water. For me, that is rainwater that I collect in my rain barrels. I reserve that specially for my Ollas. Another common question is, will the Ollas overwater my plants? Let me show you something. This here is one of my very young fig trees. It's actually about a year old. It was a little piece of twig when I got it last year, and it is actually now fruiting. I just noticed that this fig is very ripe. It's time to harvest it. It is so soft and squishy. Anyway, I'm gonna eat that now. Pretty yummy. Brown turkey. Anyway, what I wanted to show you was how quickly it drinks water. This thing was refilled just this morning and the level has already gone down to less than half. In fact, I've put this irrigation tube on top of it and there's a little hole that drips water into this, and I refill this automatically every single day. One more thing I wanted to show you with this fig tree is take a look at that root system under there. That is a lot of roots that have found their way to the Olla and are curling around it. On the other hand, take a look at this citrus plant. Once a week is more than enough for this Olla to be filled. The water level never seems to go down for this Olla. So the bottom line, your plants know exactly how much water they need, and the roots will absorb only the water that they need from around the Olla. So no, you cannot overwater using Ollas. Another common question is what types of plants benefit from Ollas the most? Things that have a really vigorous, fibrous root system, like these poor little determinate tomatoes that are on their way out, will actually really benefit from having Ollas. Things that have a really strong taproot system, like carrots and turnips, for example, you probably don't need an Olla for those. You also don't need Ollas for things like, I don't know, corn that need an excessive amount of water that an Olla just cannot provide. And finally, you also probably don't want to put Ollas for your trees. Now, these well-established plants have roots that go really, really deep. Ollas really work for plants that have more superficial roots, feeder roots at the top. Large trees will not benefit at all. In fact, the roots of large trees can break an Olla. So you want to avoid using Ollas around trees as they get larger. And that goes for the other trees as well, like your figs and others that when they're young will benefit from Ollas, but as they grow older, there's no need for them anymore. Yet another question that I had in the beginning was how close to the plant should you place your Olla? Now, there's all kinds of formulas that I've read out there. You have to plant it within a distance that is equal to the radius of the Olla. So if your Olla is 12 inches in diameter, you want to plant within 6 inches. I just use a rule of thumb. I keep it all within 6 inches. So I'm finding out and learning, but I think that's a pretty good guide, is your Olla should be within about 6 inches from the base of the plant that you're trying to water. And related to the question around how close to plant your plants to the Olla is, can you plant seeds around your Olla? And the answer is yes. However, until the seedlings germinate, you want to do topical watering because they don't have a root system, and the root system is the one that actually reaches to the Olla to get water. Once they start growing a little bit, they'll find the Olla, but until they start growing, you want to apply water topically. Also, you want to keep your little seedlings as close as possible to your Olla, so within 2 inches or so. Another question about Ollas is, does any clay pot at all work as long as it's unglazed? So I did a little experiment here. This is quite a heavy clay pot and it is also quite thick. I don't think that this thing is working out for these plants around it. They're actually still pretty dry. I do feel that the soil is quite moist over here near the Olla, but the water level is just not going down. And I think it's because this clay pot is just a little too thick and it's not letting the water out. So stick with the smaller pots, and if you really want a big pot, you probably want to invest in one of those Ollas that you get commercially because they're made of much thinner clay and they will have much more porosity to let that water flow back and forth. So if you've got questions around the water level not dropping in your clay pot, it could be one of two things. Either your plant does not need the water, so it's not pulling the water, and maybe the soil is moist enough that the water is not exiting from the Olla, or the other reason could be your clay pot is just too thick and you may want to consider investing in a thinner clay pot. And finally, the last question, should you bring your Ollas in during the winter if you have those hard freezes? And the answer to that question is probably yes. The water that gets into the pores will freeze and that will crack your Olla. Now, I live in Northern California. My winters are pretty mild. I probably don't need to bring my Ollas in, but it's a good practice to take them in at the end of the season, particularly from around your annual plants. Give them a good soak in some warm vinegar water to clean them out out thoroughly and keep them ready for your next season. That's a wrap for the first edition of questions. I'm sure that there's going to be many more that you will have, as well as I will get answers to as I continue to experiment with these. So I'm sure I'm going to have another edition with questions in the not too far future. But feel free to ask questions in the comments below, and I will either try to answer them either in the comments or in a future video, or maybe someone in our Green Love community will know the answer to the question. So don't hesitate to ask. So here's what I wanted to show you. This is my new find on Amazon. I saw this in a video that someone was showcasing on how to use these terracotta spikes to water your plants. So basically the idea is that just like you would do with an Olla, actually it's the very same concept, you'd bury this into the soil next to the plant, and then after filling this up, you'd fill up a bottle of water and then sort of flip it over onto this, and that would water the plant just like an Olla would. The advantage of this system is that we are able to use these bottles to sort of extend the size of it, because that's the biggest disadvantage. It is kind of smaller in size, but I like the way that it is narrow and so it goes into the soil. So I like the fact that we can extend it with the water that comes from the bottle. It looks a little funky in the yard, so if you've got some nice pretty bottles, it actually might look decorative. Otherwise, I've been using plastic bottles because I hear that these are very delicate and easy to break. So I'm going to go ahead and try these out. I've already put 3 in the garden, and I used plastic bottles for those, but I'm going to be using glass bottles for a few and just see how that does. The complaint about glass bottles is they are heavier, and so it's more easy to break these. So yeah, that's the biggest disadvantage. What I'm hearing, what I'm reading about is that they are pretty delicate and they break easily, but they are so much less expensive than buying an Olla or even buying a terracotta pot. So I'm going to try these out, see how they do, and I will keep you all informed. I hope you enjoyed this video, folks, and until next time, live green and love your greens.